Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast, and welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
I was a commercial diver for an oil and gas company in the 1990s. Everybody's got ghost stories from past dives. Mostly guys new to the North Sea's near zero visibility. It's like fog. Makes your mind fill in the blanks. Add to that the hallucinations that sometimes come with high-pressure nervous syndrome, and basically everyone's seen something on a dive, but most, rightly, dismiss it. I've seen those kinds of things in perfect viz, crystal clear for 200 feet in front of me. I was really deep, but I don't get HPNS, and I've never started seeing things. Some of them I touched, so either it's a hallucination of two senses, or what I saw were real physical things. I mainly post on DIY, but thinking back to past dives keeps me up at night. And this is the board they said was the right place to talk about this kind of thing. The helmets have cameras, although on about a quarter of the dives they're disabled. Usually not for any clear reason, but sometimes there's oddball stuff that doesn't belong there. Like really huge seafloor installations that don't look like they're rig-related, but something military. So it makes sense they'd cut our cameras. But other times we'll come up, and after reviewing the footage, it's backed up, locked away, and our copy is deleted. Since we see a huge variety of comically weird sea life, and later on when I try to identify it online, it turns out to be a known species, the reasons for that aren't clear either. It's hard to tell the difference between what's bizarre but known, and what might get our footage locked up. An example is, a lot of the old-timers would say that back before Deepstaria enigmatica was a known species, they assumed it was a hallucination, or at least the kind of thing you don't admit to seeing. That blew up on YouTube recently. People thought it was a monster. I can understand that. A lot of the stuff you rub elbows with down there fit that description. Some of the really big stuff is now known to be submersible rig equipment. A lot of modern rigs mount most of the hardware on the bottom, to insulate it from storms. The stuff that was obviously for humans is still officially non-existent, and it's one of those things that's better for your health if you don't ask about it too much. Some of the sea life we'd commonly talk about is also not yet known to science. We're not out there to do research, so when we run into something like that, it's basically ignored. They're only looking for work-related shit in the helmet cam footage, not studying marine biology. Which is a shame. I see some of the things that meager, underfunded baby submersible expeditions uncover and publish big glossy photos of. And it's like, that's it? We scrape those off of the bell every day. You can try to tell those types about the really big, anomalous stuff, but they laugh it off as tall tales. And if they haven't seen it themselves, I don't blame them. One of the things I learned from a buddy is that since light doesn't reach the depths we work at, all the food has to come from things that drifts down from the surface. So there's not much food to go around, and that limits how big and energetic the animals can be. There's some exceptions like giant, colossal squid and whales, but the squid are basically the only mega-scale predator down here, and whales dive from shallower waters. But there's also this thing called deep-sea gigantism, where animals will grow to much larger sizes than their related species further up. Seems contradictory. And it doesn't apply to jellyfish or crustaceans, apparently. Everything I've seen that was man-sized or bigger was either something like a jellyfish, made of the same transparent rubbery stuff, or something like an overgrown crab, shrimp, or lobster. A lot of those kinds of things ride up with us, clinging to the outside of the bell. The lights attract them.
Also, since you've already lost me, this was a huge tell, screaming, this is a work of fiction, y'all. It made it hard to suspend my disbelief, and coming so soon in your narrative seemed fatal.
If I were out to fool you, yeah, I probably would have eased you into that. Suffice to say, there's loads of man-made stuff in the ocean that isn't advertised. Nuclear subs don't just have a docking collar for rescue.
Well, as far as I know, a lot of shit is built underwater. Just take all the wiring between North America and Asia. Also, have you ever seen something that scared you shitless? Have you ever been attacked? Because as far as I know, squids often attack things that glow. What company did you work for? What was the biggest creature apart from a whale you've seen? Have you ever seen something you couldn't explain? Have you heard anything like the bloop?
Yes, first time I saw a siphonophore, and again when I saw something obviously related to jellies but on a huge scale. It was hollow and billowy, but unusually opaque, so you couldn't tell unless you touched it. Just a huge wall of pale, undulating flesh suddenly closing in, passing by and then receding into the distance. There was also what I think may have been some type of saltwater gator with flippers, but when I described it to a buddy, he assured me it was a Greenland shark. That wasn't a shark. I'd need to get a better look to say what it was, but it wasn't a shark.
What was the most paranormal or messed up thing you've experienced? Something you still can't explain yourself.
Well, when I say I don't hallucinate, I mean I don't see stuff I could mistake for reality. And I've got an above-average tolerance, I think. But there are occasionally dives past right up on the limits of what humans can survive, where the brain just kind of goes nuts. My understanding is that the pressure reduces the firing threshold for neurons, so they just kind of fire randomly. Random colors, sounds, memories, tastes and smells, etc. I've never been deeper than 180 feet, but that's deep enough to feel the beginnings of it. Look into the changing symptoms of nitrogen narcosis by depth sometime. Starts out really pleasant, but after about 100 feet it turns into something you wouldn't wish on your worst enemy. Mixed gases are supposed to prevent that, but different people have different tolerances. For the really deep dives, we used a breathing gas called hydrox. There's a variant with helium in it called hydreliox, but I don't know much about it. What I do know is, the Navy is hot for hydrox, because you can manufacture it aboard a submarine. By reclaiming hydrogen from the process they use to extract oxygen from seawater, they can make their own hydrox and never run out. Last I heard, they were experimenting with pig digestive bacteria that, when seeded in human stomachs, accelerates decompression by chemically neutralizing the nitrogen. Only works with hydrox naturally, or I doubt they'd bother.
All this cool stuff goes unknown because no government wants to fund an underwater equivalent of NASA. That's dumb. Think of what we could discover.
There was going to be a wet NASA back in the 60s. For a while after the Navy's Sea Lab program, there was serious planning for a large 30 to 50-man deep-sea research station called Ocean Lab, 1,000 feet down. They would have used a compact naval reactor to make hydrox breathing gas from seawater, so they could keep the base equalized with the water for ease of entry and exit. We decided on the shuttle program and the Vietnam War instead, I guess. Officially, the Sea Lab program was canceled after 3. I don't for a minute think they just up and abandoned the project. Just stopped telling the public about it. If what I saw was some modern iteration of that, they're almost certainly using the Ocean Lab scheme of nuclear-powered hydrox generation. I'd sure like to know what they know about some of these critters. What are some of the man-made things you've seen that you can't explain? One job had me documenting wreckage near the equator, a nice excuse for a vacation. Well into the twilight zone, I saw clusters of big nets, bags, some kind of thin rubbery material, each holding down a huge bubble of air and glowing from some inside light source. Each one was restrained by a circular metal platform with legs. I assumed it was some kind of fish farm or sensor cluster or something. The footage was wiped, so I'm gonna go with the Navy sensor cluster until I find out otherwise. That is never. Was there ever a point when you thought you were legitimately in danger/threatened and not just scared? Yes. The only time I used a rebreather, it malfunctioned. Afterward, it was determined that shock waves in the water from pneumatic tools we were using caused it, and that's apparently a known issue. I felt lightheaded, got tunnel vision, etc., and felt certain I was going to die. I can't explain it, that specific feeling, imminent death. I woke up inside the Bell. Dive buddy dragged me from the work site back to the Bell, and once topside, they sent in medications through the deco chamber's little airlock. Historically, the earliest rebreathers required that you actively look at the dials and control your own portions of oxygen and other gases. It had no computer of any kind to do that. Those early users must have been maniacs. How good was the pay? What skills do I need to become a commercial diver? 50 to 60,000. Very good money. Although you realize why right away. Some can't handle it. Others live for it. That's for 5 to 8 years. You're pressured to quit after that to avoid liabilities for your health issues, which will show up guaranteed if you keep doing it much longer. Learn to weld. That will greatly widen the number of jobs available. Also, there are loads of get certified quick in just X number of weeks programs. Avoid these. These are sketchy. A legit program will last most of a year. Generally speaking, decide ahead of time who you want to work for, then ask them directly what certification programs they look for.
I have lived near the ocean my whole life. Pretty sea smart, surf, fish, boating, do all sorts of things like that. Go out on a fishing boat with a few friends. One is a boat operator for a lifeguard agency. The ocean is completely flat on a nice cloudy day. We stopped on the edge of what looked to be a patch of strange water. The water we were in was a dark blue-green, clear visibility. The patch in front of us was milky white-blue, and I couldn't see anything. As I said, the ocean was pretty flat that day, but the patch was boiling. Waves were splashing and swirling as if there was some sort of turbulence underwater. This patch of water literally went in each direction at least a mile. Both me and the captain noped out of there. We go to that area of the ocean a lot. It's literally in the middle of nowhere. We haven't seen anything like that patch of strange water since, but it still makes us nervous talking about it today.
I love these threads. I don't know why, but deep water has always fascinated and terrified me. As a child, I went swimming every day. My parents joked that I was part fish. No, we didn't live in Innsmouth. I seemed to be fearless when it came to distance swimming, diving, etc. But there was a part of me, even in a lake or a pool, that feared the depths. I would swim out to the point where I had no idea where the bottom was, and I couldn't dive deep enough to reach it, just to feel my heart beat fast and experience that moment of panic. As an adult, I went boating, snorkeling, and swimming in the ocean off the coast of Belize. The water was so brilliantly colored, electric blues, turquoise, emerald greens. It was nothing I ever imagined I would see in real life. At one point I went out past the usual diving and snorkeling area, to get a closer look at part of a coral reef. Suddenly, the shelf dropped off into nothing. Just a sharp drop, the water 100 shades of blue, fading into deep violet. The sea was rough at that point, and it was a struggle to get back to the boat, but I loved the waves and how they carried me, and I remember a part of me wanting to get carried away, to sink into that darkness. My whole life I have had a recurring standing on a platform in the middle of the ocean, no land visible. The platform is clear, like glass, with clear walls. It is like one of those massive tanks at Sea World, only the water is outside. I see the waves growing larger and more violent, and then there is a brief calm, and then a wave so massive it blocks out view of everything else. I know it will break me and wash me away out to sea, and I wake up breathless and excited.
What makes the ocean so frightening is, as far as we've come as a species, even as we've mastered survival and the elements on land throughout most of the earth, and even have mastered the skies, the ocean is still a territory where we are one of the most vulnerable creatures. It's bigger than we can imagine. It's mostly unknown. New and fascinating, mind-boggling creatures are still being discovered in the vast open deep. Many of them are masterful predators, or have other traits that make them organic marvels. Gills, thick armor, strong claws, the sharpest teeth and mandibles in the animal kingdom, soulless eyes that can see even in waters so deep that no light reaches them. Glowing appendages, suckers, beaks, stinging cells, venomous barbs and bites, multiple pupils, rows of fins, bone-crushing jaws, living fossils, incredible strength, shockwave-inducing forces, sonar, seemingly impossible flexibility, redundant organs, and nightmarish faces. Every creature in the ocean is better capable of surviving there than we are. Half of them could kill us on a whim, and damned if most of those don't look the part too. Even the water by itself has claimed thousands upon thousands of lives. We simply aren't fit to survive in it. If you look into the deep and feel an instinctive fear, believe me, it is by no means an irrational one.
Hey/X/, I'm not well versed in Greentext, so deal with it. I thought I'd share my experiences, so please tell me if any of you have any explanations for this. I'm currently at college, however, I grew up on an island in the Puget Sound called Vashon Island. We had a small rowboat and bayliner boat that I used to explore around the Puget Sound and also used for crabbing. When I was 17, me and my friends would boat out into the middle of the Puget Sound to party. Over time, I made friends with this drifter type who was living out on a sailboat anchored in Dockton Harbor. It's between the legs of the island in the picture. I brought some alcohol because he didn't have a car, and he couldn't really get any supplies, so I would make some runs to town for the guy once a month, and we became good friends. One night I got so wasted that I ended up crashing in his spare bunk on the boat. Around 10 p.m. I started to hear a tapping on the hull. This is not entirely uncommon, so I didn't care at first. Over time, the tapping developed into an incessant knocking. It sounded like someone was under the boat knocking. Hearing this, the guy, who I'll call Smokey because he's a chain smoker, woke up and asked me, "Anon, want to see something trippy?" He got out some weighted rope that is typically used for crabbing so the line doesn't float in the water and attached a hook to the end, after which he opened up a can of Spam and skewered the Spam onto the hook and headed to the deck. It was very dark out because of the overcast sky, so the only light we had came out from the cabin. He lowered the hook into the water and tied off the other end to the boat. The line straightened out and jerked around for a couple minutes as we sat there. Once the line stopped jerking, Smokey hauled the line out of the water. Pulling the hook into the light, a few empty Coors Banquet beer cans were skewered onto the hook. Smokey looked at me with a serious look on his face and told me not to litter my beer cans again. With an angry look on his face, Smokey told me to stay there, and he headed back into the hold. A few minutes later, he emerged and handed me a quarter, which he instructed me to toss into the water and apologize. Not sure what was going on, I did as I was told, and flipped the quarter into the water. Following my experience with Smokey every time I went boating, I would flip a quarter into the water as some sort of good luck charm. During crab season a few years later, me and my buddies launched our crab pots and got started drinking, during which we decided to grab some food at a nearby restaurant that served boats called Tide's Tavern. Finally returning, we started to retrieve our crab pots. We retrieved our crab pots and pulled the boat out of the water and headed home to start preparing our catch. After I had boiled the crabs, I started the gutting process. For context, when you gut a crab, you first have to boil it, and then with a knife there is this tab on their bellies that you can tear open. After you have done this, you can rip the top of the shell out to dispose of the brains and whatnot. After this has been completed, you can break the crab in half and you're all done. Upon cracking the crab's upper shell, I was shocked to discover quarters in the shell cavity of every crab. When we pulled the crabs out of the water, they were still alive, so the quarters would have had to have been in there at the time. Nothing like this ever happened again while crabbing, and I haven't been able to find anything online. If any anons here want to see if you can experience anything similar, my crab grounds that I went to are located near the entrance to Quartermaster Harbor on the side of Maury Island. Vashon Island is actually 2 islands connected, and Maury is the smaller one.
The deep ocean is truly frightening. It's the vast stretches of lonely cold and dark and seemingly alien creatures swimming and undulating about, sightless, devouring mindlessly. There's some truly frightening-looking things out there, and the fact we haven't explored 90% of the ocean yet makes you wonder what else we'll find. The bloop wasn't Cthulhu. Cthulhu isn't real, friends. It was some colossal geothermic reaction or some vast creature, a cephalopod or jellyfish-type thing, semi-shapeless. Down at that depth, the pressure is incredible, so it'd be hard to support a skeleton and hard to maintain a vigorous lifestyle. It might be some huge lumbering thing, totally harmless, just really huge. I imagine it's not just making sounds because it's doing it for a reason. Communication, hunting, sonar.
Anything down there would have had 3.5 billion years to evolve. I imagine at those depths any creatures are fairly resilient, so it's not entirely irrational to argue that they could survive the various extinction events that have occurred fairly unscathed. Could literally be anything down there. Further, the bloop and all other sounds from that region are seemingly extraordinarily rare, so there must be a purpose behind the need for such loud sounds. Perhaps it's for mating, perhaps it's the noise they make when they die, perhaps it's the sound they make when they're first born, who knows? They could live for thousands of years, live on rocks for we know, and have their own biological geothermal energy generator. Literally anything could be possible.
Considering that we still find new species of animals on land, which makes up just over a quarter of the globe, it isn't surprising that we keep finding new aquatic species because we can only monitor a small portion of the oceans at a time, and even that will just cover the surface. Take the following for example. The surface of the ocean covers around 360 million square kilometers of the globe. A very small proportion of that will ever be in the range of view of the hundreds of thousands of ships that traverse the ocean each day, many of which are contained to small shipping lanes. Because of this, we struggle to observe and document even large known creatures, such as blue whales, which have to surface for air. Further note that blue whales, despite their size, pretty much never get caught in fishing nets, and they tend to keep relatively close to the surface. Now, the volume of the ocean is 1.3 billion cubic kilometers, with an average depth of 3,790 meters. That means there is approximately 700 million cubic kilometers of ocean that is deeper than 3,790 meters. We can safely say that anything below this depth is likely way outside the range of 99.9% of fishing vessels. So anything that lives deeper than this will not ever be caught or seen by fishing vessels. Even military submarines cannot go lower than 700 meters, else the ship will be crushed under the pressure, so we can confidently posit that anything in that area will very rarely be seen, if at all. Now imagine a huge creature which doesn't need to surface for air. Let's say it's a squid-like animal, and the creature sticks to the deep and does not chase food to the surface. Let's say the lack of pressure above 4,000 meters would kill it. Perhaps it's 100 times the size of a blue whale, so it'll be 3,000 meters in length, and have a volume of 1.4 million cubic meters, or 0.0014 cubic kilometers. Typically, larger animals have smaller populations than larger animals. But, for the sake of argument, let's say it has the same population as blue whales do currently, about 10,000. The total population of this large creature would thus have a volume of 14 cubic kilometers, or 0.000002% of the ocean below 3,790 meters. Consider how little we monitor those depths, and how rare it is that we go down to investigate them. It is completely possible that such a huge creature exists down there.
The water babies of Pyramid Lake. One of the most enduring urban myths in the Reno area involves Pyramid Lake, located just a few miles north of town on the Paiute Indian Reservation. Call it a myth at your discretion. Nearly every spring, an unlucky fisherman, angling for a record-sized cutthroat trout, disappears. Their bodies are seldom recovered. Some attribute their disappearance to the 350-foot depth of the lake, while others claim it's the water babies. Just who or what are the water babies? Since no one has lived to tell the tale, it all depends on who you ask. It is an established fact that before the white man arrived at Pyramid Lake, members of the Paiute tribe threw ill-formed or premature babies into the water. The tribe members felt that this was a necessary task to keep the tribe strong in the harsh desert environment. According to one version of this Reno urban legend, the angry spirits of the unfortunate infants took hold of the lake over the centuries. Now, nearly every spring, these tormented spirits take their revenge on lake dwellers. The Paiutes who live near the lake, however, tell a different story. According to staff members of the Pyramid Lake Paiute Tribe Museum and Visitor Center, this urban myth began with a family vacation of sorts to the California coast. While there, one of the Paiute sons met and fell in love with a mermaid-like creature. He was determined to marry her and brought her back to Pyramid Lake with him to meet his fellow tribe members. Upon seeing the strange creature, the Paiute tribe members insisted that he take her back to the ocean. But before they left, the rejected creature put a curse on the water. Shortly thereafter, two sisters were washing clothes in the river. One sister had a small infant who she left in the shade of a large tree while she did her chores. Unbeknownst to the sisters, a serpent emerged from the river, eating the baby and assuming its form. When the young mother went to feed her child, the demonic infant began to devour the young mother. After the poor mother's sister and several tribe members failed to make the baby release its grip, a medicine man was summoned. A fateful deal was made. The demon would be free to inhabit the lake if the young mother was restored to health. Reno mythbusters and ghost hunters are still baffled by the paranormal presence that looms over Pyramid Lake. People still report that they hear the dejected cries of an invisible baby or the laughter of ghostly children. Such noises constitute a bad omen, according to the Pyramid Lake natives. As one Paiute man tells it, if you hear it, it's bad news. If you see it, you're dead. All I can tell you is if you're planning a trip to Pyramid Lake, it's best to fish near the shoreline. Better yet, admire the beauty of the lake from a far yet safe distance and move on.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel as more green texts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.
Remember to check out the Odyssey page in the description for a second archive of the channel's videos.
There's also a Rumble archive as a backup.